Sure. Well, the second presentation pretty much answered it very thoroughly.
Okay.
So I did have a second question though about the well, either of the respondents. It was really about, I just typed it in about the role of psychological habituation and possibly in explaining the positive shifts that were dominant in changes over time, whether that phenomenon is considered part of what they're looking what they're looking at, and if so, if they can distinguish that from other effects.
I'll go ahead and respond to that. To be honest, we have not looked into that. That's a great suggestion. I can definitely get back to you about that or respond to any comments line by line if interested.
And another, just to kind of add to that, another future sort of aspect that we're looking at with this data set is a more sort of cognitive versus affective division of the data. But the psychological habituations is not something that I'm particularly familiar with, but it sounds very interesting, and as Sam said, it's something that it sounds like we could definitely look into. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks for those questions, David. Kate, you've got a question. Kate Sharon, did you want to ask that yourself? You can see it on the screen anyway.
Okay. Yeah, thanks very much. It is on the screen. I enjoyed both those presentations very much. Fantastic work, really interesting. Aaron, as you were speaking, the data was moving past a little too quickly for me. I've got my son here alongside, and that, so I might have missed it if you'd gotten into it. But this pristineness, the way that the pristineness variable influenced the two populations very differently, and it made me think: are the folks on the coast kind of having that opposite effect, because they're thinking that if it's offshore, then there's not going to be the pressure onshore, and so it's kind of a displacement thing. So it's for them, but again, it moved pretty quickly. So
you're asking about maybe whether or not the folks on the coast are perhaps they consider this to be more of a positive pristineness prediction because the turbines are going to be offshore instead of nearby, and so it's kind of preserving their pristineness onshore. So I think that's a really interesting possibility. And going forward, as Sam is doing, is actually getting a chance to go out and talk to these people a little bit more. I think that's something that could possibly be brought up. It's also just possible that the idea of pristineness and the idea of the coastal and ocean environment is just different between the two populations in a way that we haven't really tacked down yet. But I think your idea has merit, and it's interesting. So thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Aaron, while you're on that, I think it's Gundla Hubner has also posted a question. While they're going to her, you can just see it there. It's on pristineness as well. I'm wondering, asking if it's correlated with climate change, pristineness.
I don't have the direct answer to that question right now. If I think the question would be, is having pristineness as one of the top place meanings perhaps correlated with concern for climate change? Is that more along the line of what's being asked?
I know, Gundla, yes. Do you want? Hi.
Yeah, it's me. Sorry. Yeah, right. So this is my question, because it's very unusual that you have once a negative predictor weight and then in the other sample you do have a positive. So I was thinking about moderators, and one moderator could be the climate, the concern about climate change. So that's the background of my question.
I think that's a very good and interesting question. It's not something that I looked at specifically. It's in the regression, and I could break it down further to see if it's actually having a true effect. They're not necessarily the fact that they're both in the regression model means that we tested them for collinearity. So they're not necessarily, those two variables are not necessarily moving with each other enough that we were concerned about it. We know that climate change concern was one of the more significant predictors, was one of the predictors that was either significant or near significant predictor in let's see, just make sure I'm not telling you a fib, for support of the project in general. But yes, I think that's an interesting, perspective, an interesting question.
Okay, we've two other questions which we should be able to cover, and then we'll go on to the third presentation. But Rebecca, you've asked a question. Do you want to come on and just verbalize it? You've written it down anyway, it's quite clear, but I don't know if you want to ask it anyway. Hi.
Hello. Yeah, thank you. Really interesting projects and presentations. My thought when I was listening to you was whether people's attitudes would change over a longer period, kind of longer than just the 1 year, and whether the project had considered revisiting this after a longer time period.
Mm-hmm. It has not been discussed yet. I don't think it should be discounted as a possibility. The one thing that may influence that in the future is there are some currently some developments with the power cable, and in the face of that, it might possibly influence attitudes. I would say revisiting this in the future may or may not happen because based on the interview responses so far, many people are saying that it blends into the background. They're sort of filtering it out. So I'm not sure if we would see a lot of development past the attitudes as they are currently right now. But as I said, if there are developments with the cable, or if something breaks, or if something, a new national crisis comes along that really influences the way we think as a whole, not only on Block Island and coastal Rhode Island about wind power and offshore wind in general, that could potentially bring up a good research question. So the answer is it depends. I hope so, and stay tuned.
Thank you.